Good evening, Steelers fans. It is Sunday night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our Steelers post-game show after a 27-13 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles by Paul Zeise, Post-Gazette sports columnist. Paul, pretty brutal loss in pretty much all facets today. And I think it's kind of the loss that a lot of people have been dreading, the one where they just looked outclassed by a good team in their building. Considering what you're now going to be facing over these next handful of weeks, you've got a trip to Baltimore next week. You've got the Chiefs at home on Christmas, and then you got the playoffs looming after that. I think there was an argument to be made that they could lose this game and still have you feel pretty good about them if they kind of lost the right way. But I don't think this game was that today, Paul. Do you?
No, I think one of the things that's important, this game to me, they just looked like the Eagles were better than the Steelers. In a lot of different facets of the game. I think one of the things that probably is a little bit alarming, we talked about without George Pickens, the offense might sputter a little bit and all of that good stuff. But what is a little bit alarming to me, and I think should be alarming to a number of people, let me look at what the final look was here. It was one of these things where they gave up, what's the total here? Something like 420 yards of offense. Do I have that right? Yeah, is that right for the Eagles? Something like that, 400.
Yeah, I'm seeing 401 for the Eagles to 163 for the Steelers.
There it is. It was up. I was waiting for it to update. 401 yards of offense. They averaged basically 5.2 yards per play. Jalen Hurts, remember they basically were going to run him out of town or something last week because he couldn't throw the ball. He came out and did whatever he wanted to do. The offensive line of the Eagles absolutely just dominated the Steelers. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but I thought both sides of the ball up front, the Eagles dominated the game. And, if you're like the Eagles offensive line, if they're going to be able to do that, week in and week out and give Jalen Hurts that kind of room to throw. And let's not forget, they had about probably like a quarter and a half, almost 2 quarters without Saquon Barkley in the game. I mean, if they can do that with their offensive line, I think what Jalen Hurts is showing you is with those 2 receivers he's got, he can be a pretty dangerous passer as well. So for the Steelers to give up that many yards, I thought really one of the signature plays of the game, Adam, was down around the goal line where they absolutely needed to get a stop. And I forget who it was. I think it might have been Patrick Queen and maybe Joey Porter or something, where they kind of did the swinging gate where the guy ran right between them. It would have been they'd held him to a field goal because it would have been like 3 or 4 yards short of the first down, but he just ran right through them and almost scored. The other part of it is the Eagles were able to dictate the game the way they want to dictate it. They're good when they get a lead because they can run the football. And, I don't know what the final numbers were, but it was something like 23 minutes of possession time in the second half for the Eagles, which, that's
the Steelers had 20 minutes and 8 seconds total, Paul. So just barely over 1/3 of the game that they even had the ball in their hands.
They dominated them. Up front, they dominated them. So, my only cautionary tale is basically I just think maybe the Eagles are better than the Steelers. I don't know that I want to read too much more into this game. And I know that that's what I would call, a commentary that people, they need more than that. But sometimes it's that simple. It felt to me like the Eagles were just better.
Well, I think you saw today, Paul, why the Eagles are the prototype, right? And Andy Weidl has had a big hand in building both of these teams, but the Eagles are just further along in the project. It's the depth that they have, I think, particularly on that defensive front, that the Steelers are aspiring for. I think you can say the same thing on the offensive line. Obviously, you've made strides with the draft picks you've dedicated to Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick. Broderick Jones, Troy Fautano will be back in there next year. You've got a young offensive line. Maybe you can be like this Eagles offensive line in the future. But I think what you saw today is why the Eagles are further ahead, with this method of team building that both of them are on. Paul, we're going to get into all of it. Russell Wilson, the running game, the receivers. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Paul, as physically dominated as the Steelers were today, I thought the game really hinged on what happened with the turnovers and what happened immediately after them. Steelers get the 2 fumbles in that first half. They turn them into 3 points. Eagles get the Najee Harris fumble, turn it into 7 the other way. And I think that really, pretty much decided the game, was as much as anything. We can talk about the penalty that cost them the touchdown on that second fumble and the punt return fumble. We can talk about that separately, but just those pivot points, Paul, the Steelers lost all of them, and that's hard to overcome, especially against a team of this caliber.
Yeah, you get a fumble in the first quarter, and you don't turn it into anything, and then you punt, and then they give it, they basically give it right back to you with another fumble, and despite all of that, you come out with only 3 points. I thought that was going to be a problem for them. It sort of turned out to be a problem because then the Eagles were able to score a touchdown. So despite being despite losing the turnover battle 0-2, the Eagles were still up, 10-3. The Harris play was, obviously frustrating because they were only down 7 and they were driving. But every so often a turnover is going to happen. The larger issue, Adam, is that the defense basically let them go. What was it, about 70 yards, 80 yards right down the field to score a touchdown? So like sometimes when I see the stat, points off of turnovers, I think it's a little bit of a stat that might not be as accurate as it needs to be. And the reason is because that really wasn't points off of the turnover. I mean, they still had to go 80 yards to score. It was, it was actually a longer field than most kickoffs are. So I feel like that was probably when the game was over, was when they, wasn't the fumble, because the fumble, every so often you're going to make a play like that where you're going to fumble the ball or whatever. That wasn't, to me, what the problem was. The problem was they went 13 plays, 74 yards, scored a touchdown to go up 2 touchdowns. And, when the Eagles have a lead, they are really hard to chase. They just are. And they run the ball well. They have good quarterback design runs. So even if you're stopping their running back, you've got to worry about him running the ball. They to me, and I just felt like, you can't be an elite defense and allow a team to go 74 yards. An elite defense there gets off the field, gets them to punt it, gets the ball back for their offense. You don't allow them to go 74 yards or whatever it was in 13 plays to score.
Yeah, that was brutal. Paul, I think the running game is kind of where I want to start offensively. Look, you're going against a great Eagles front 7. It's not an easy assignment, but no one on the Steelers is over 15 yards individually for the day. They got 56 yards on 17 carries, 3.3 as an average. Just taken completely out of the game. I think we talked about the time of possession, just not a ton of offensive snaps, period. So it wasn't like they were going to rack up a ton of stats, but man, Paul, they just got dominated in a way that I didn't quite expect. I don't know if I expected them to thrive against this group, but just nothing available in the running game. And if you're the Steelers without George Pickens, that is pretty much a death knell for anything you might want to accomplish with the passing game and with the receivers they have available.
Well, and I think what it showed is, against the bad teams, they were able to survive. Against the bad defenses or bad teams, they were able to survive without Pickens. But, you play against a good defense, you need your playmakers. It's just all there is to it. And I think that's one of the things about George Pickens, if he doesn't play next week or he can't play next week against the Ravens, then all of a sudden that game becomes a little bit more critical because then all of a sudden I probably favor the Ravens in that game. If Pickens can play, I'd probably still like the Steelers to beat the Ravens. But without Pickens, I think that game could be really difficult. And of course, I just feel like with Pickens, with respect to the other guys that are receivers, they're just not going to make enough plays for you to win games against really good teams. They're just not. I'm looking. I'm like, what? I was flipping back and forth between the Bills game and the Steelers game, and every time I turned it on, there was some playmaker making a big play in the Bills game. You got to have more than just one guy. And we talked about Pat Freiermuth last week. For a little bit there, it looked like they were going to start getting him going, and then all of a sudden. But again, to your larger point, they didn't have the ball that much. And so if you don't have the ball that much, it's hard to get anything going.
Yeah, I'm looking up the total snaps now. They were out-snapped, the Steelers, 77-41. So almost doubled up in plays, just like you're doubled up in possession. All of the offensive stats are going to look small when the defense is on the field for as long as they were, and the offense was part of that. But the defense deserves its blame too. We'll get to that in the second segment. Paul, I've seen a surprising amount of Russell Wilson anger in the comments. The one guy saying he's washed. I don't know that I saw that today. I just saw not a lot of plays available to him. He finishes 14 of 22 for 128 yards in the touchdown. So only misses 8 throws on the whole day. Was he also a victim in some ways of just not having the ball enough? And really, I think you can go back to that first quarter when they got 3 and out to start the game. That just put them in a hole that it was almost impossible for him to dig them out of.
I gotta be honest with you. There's certain things that just sort of tire me out. And this thing about, the Russell Wilson thing, it just gets to a point where it's absolutely ridiculous for the people that are still out there, that are still trying to make a case that, Justin Fields should be the guy, or that Russell Wilson. We had a few people in the chat today who went on and on and on about Justin Fields. And you just sound like a moron. Okay. He's not better than Russell Wilson. A. B, you're asking Russell Wilson to go against the number 1 or number 2, right, rated pass defense. I think they're number 1 or number 2.
I think they were number 2, yeah.
Number 2, one of the top 2 pass defenses in the league. You're asking him to do that without his best weapon. And quite frankly, his offensive line, I thought, got a little bit manhandled as well, so that didn't help matters. So anybody that's blaming this on Russell Wilson, that's just one of those narratives thing where, Adam, people that were convinced it was a bad move to put him in, or convinced that there was a bad move to bring him in, all that other stuff, the Justin Fields fanboys, the guys that are still butthurt about Kenny Pickett, that whole group, right? Now they're going to hang on to this nonsense that somehow Russell Wilson is to blame for what happened today. It's just silly. At the end of the day, Russell Wilson has had a really good season for the Steelers. He's been really good. And, oh, by the way, Justin Fields doesn't make that throw to Pat Freiermuth for a touchdown. You could have actually taken the Eagles' defensive players off the field, and Justin Fields still doesn't make that throw. I mean, that's why you have Russell Wilson. So I'm so tired of whatever the motivation for some of these people with their narratives when it comes to Russell Wilson. Whatever it is, it's just now become silly.
Yeah, passer rating of what was it? I think 94.5 today. 3WS. Give them the shout out. Listen, if that was the Steelers' losing effort at quarterback these last couple of years, when you had Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, all of those guys in the game, this would have been one of the best performances we saw in a loss by some of those guys. And that doesn't mean he's perfect. I think that the big flaw in the game plan was. Tom Brady was noting it on the broadcast. We're going to talk about Tom Brady in a little bit too, because this was my first weapons grade exposure to him. But Paul, they just did not take the stuff underneath a whole lot, and they still seem to be looking for the moon ball downfield passing game. And that is just not what the Eagles defense is going to give you with the guys they have on the other side. Quinion Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, all the guys that they have available in that secondary that the Steelers simply do not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing too. But you also got to see a difference in, when you have two receivers that are really, really good, like the Eagles do. You know what? It tests your depth and your ability to cover. Whereas with the Steelers, again, I think the Steelers are just sort of running at you with a couple of guys. You know what I mean? And so the Eagles secondary being really good, combined with the fact that the Steelers really didn't have their weapons, you throw those things together and guess what you have? A situation of where the passing game is probably going to stall. And you know what? That's just sort of when it comes to football, that's just the truth. The best players are the best players for a reason. They make a difference. They change your entire ability to do whatever it is you want to do. So, it's one of those things where I watched the Eagles and said, those two receivers make it very easy for Jalen Hurts to do what he does. And I watched the Steelers and said, these guys aren't scaring anybody, period. And I think that's really kind of, again, I hope we're not sitting here at the, after a playoff loss saying, well, I told you so long ago. But I hope we're not sitting here saying, boy, they needed one more. They probably needed one more receiver to really move forward.
Yeah, speaking of that, Paul, has anyone gotten more ink for accomplishing so little as Mike Williams in this offense? I feel like I can write the Mike Williams question down on the script before the game even starts, I feel like most of the time. What did he finish with today? One catch for 15 yards on 2 targets. We've been talking about him as the answer for George Pickens light, the guy who can make plays to kind of keep this offense humming. And we're 2 games into that, Paul. I haven't seen that guy at all.
Well, again, the whole point of getting him, wasn't it, in case George Pickens got hurt? They're not using him. Period. They're just not using him. And so that tells me that they're not seeing enough in practice. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, Adam, a lot of fans are convinced that, there must be something personal against him, or they must be holding something against him, or they must, no, they're watching practice, and apparently they just don't think he's that good. They think he maybe can give them a little bit of a, stretch the field kind of feel to them, and maybe he can help them out a little bit, but they just don't think he's nearly as good as maybe some fans think he's supposed to be, right? That's the only thing I can come up with. But it's not surprising, I mean, he's older, and we knew that he probably was, coming off a major injury. We knew he was probably going to be a guy that maybe wasn't ready to really contribute.
Yeah, and they gave up a low round draft pick, Paul, and I think you're seeing why. And I think it underscores that they had a lot of opportunities to address this problem. They didn't do it, and that is part of why we are here after this game. And why I think it's a somewhat bleak outlook without George Pickens. If he can't play in these next couple of weeks, we'll see what they say after the game about his availability. What the vibe is. I think there was a hope that he could be back against the Ravens, but this is, I think, one of Omar Khan's big misses. He had a lot of hits that have put them in position to be one of the better teams in the AFC, but this was the piece that they were missing, Paul, I think, to be bona fide Super Bowl contenders, and this was their first test, and I think they failed it miserably in that regard, and I think Mike Williams is kind of the microcosm of that.
Yeah, for sure, he definitely is. What I would say, they went out and tried to get a bunch of different receivers and couldn't make any of them stick. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, one good news from today is because the Colts and the Dolphins lost, I think the Steelers actually did clinch a playoff spot today despite the loss. So, I mean, if you're looking for silver linings, I think that is one. I just looked at the score. It looks like the Colts lost. The game is final. So if the Colts lost, and the Dolphins lost earlier, that was part of the road for the Steelers to actually get to the playoffs.
I want to talk a little bit about the knucklehead stuff, Paul. They get into the scrap down in the end zone after one run by Najee Harris that had them pretty well set up there to score a touchdown. I think it would have been 2nd and 2 at like the 5, something like that. And they draw the penalty by getting in the scrap in the end zone. I think once again, we saw on Hard Knocks that there was a lot of, somewhat of excusing of the penalties for George Pickens, but he hasn't been the only one that's picked up these penalties this year. We've talked about Broderick Jones a lot on this show. Today was Darnell Washington and Calvin Austin. Do you look at a day like today and say, this is where the lack of accountability sometimes can show up, or is this just, part of playing football sometimes?
I think it's lack of maturity. I don't know if it's accountability. I mean, I tend to believe that Mike Tomlin, is not going to put up with stuff and probably does behind the scenes deal with some of this stuff. But it's just a lack of maturity. It's just stupid. It's just dumb, selfish football. It really is. Those kind of penalties are ridiculous. And I'll give you another one that somehow they got away with was Jalen Carter on the other end with that on the punt. I don't know what he's thinking there. Where they're getting ready to get the ball back and he gets that ridiculous roughing penalty or whatever it was. And then, of course, they changed it and gave back the Philadelphia the ball. Those kind of things, to me, one of the biggest problems with the Steelers, and this is, again, I'm sure people are going to label me a hater, okay, but they've won nothing in 7 or 8 years, and they still are convinced they're the big bad Steelers. They still are convinced they're the big bad Steelers, and there's this image of they've got to try and be the tough guys of the league, and everybody's so scared of them and all the other stuff. It's like, you understand that you haven't been relevant in the AFC since about 2016 or 17 or something like that? Like, why don't you just try and be a little bit more humble and worry about winning football games and playing good football and stop all the other silliness? But again, it seems like every year there's one or two of these knuckleheads in the locker room that just ruins it.
Yeah, I thought that was just an unbelievable gaffe. Especially you had been on skates for the entirety of the beginning of that game, and you get a chance to tie it up. Just recognize the moment a little bit. And I think, to your point, Paul, the Eagles also think that way, and they acted like that kind of team today. I think that's reflexive. The Jalen Carter penalty reflects that's the way they want to play too, and they did a better job of that today than the Steelers did. Paul, we're going to talk about the defense here in a second. Just want to thank another couple of sponsors. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky & White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. I also want to thank Archie's on Carson. The game's always on at Archie's, Pittsburgh's best place for food, drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 12 p.m. to 2 a.m. Be sure to check out their daily drink specials and stop in for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeise sent you. Paul, how did the defense play this poorly against a passing game that came in famously struggling? There was a reported rift between A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts. Certainly didn't look like it today from the way that passing game played. A.J. Brown finishes with 8 catches for 110 yards in the touchdown. Devontae Smith goes off for 11 catches, 109 yards in the score. Man, those guys were great, Paul, and we were told that they probably wouldn't be, and then it was the opposite that was true.
Well, it was clear early on the Steelers basically said, we're not going to let Saquon Barkley beat us, right? That's basically what they said. We're not going to let Saquon Barkley beat us. The Eagles came out, and, this tells you that they've got a pretty good coaching staff. They came out and said, we're going to counter that immediately, right? And we're going to take advantage of spots in the secondary. I really don't think the Steelers cover that well. I just don't. I know that we're supposed to be in love with Dante Jackson and Joey Porter Jr. and these guys. Adam, what I've seen is any good receiver seems to get open against these guys. And it's just a matter of, can they block two things? Can they block the front seven, which is not always easy with Watt and Highsmith and those guys? Can they block those guys? The Eagles were able to do that today. And the other thing is you have a quarterback who can throw the ball on time. Accurately and on time. And the Eagles had that today. That's usually about the only thing I can tell you when it comes to teams against the Steelers. Joey Porter Jr., speaking of knuckleheads, I mean, these guys, they do a whole lot of woofing and talking for guys that really get burnt or get beat or whatever a lot more than they should. So to me, the Eagles basically said, we think the Steelers are going to come out and they're going to try and do everything in their power to stop Saquon Barkley. So we're going to start out throwing the ball and see what happens. And, of course, with those two receivers and that offensive line, they made it work.
Paul, I want to talk about another – you mentioned the coverage situation. I think another original sin of the roster construction here. We talked a lot about it in the preseason and in the offseason, the lack of a third corner that you felt really good about in that room. And they've gotten away with having Joey Porter and Dante Jackson, who've done good things, even though they've been inconsistent at times. But I think you feel decently about those guys as your ones and twos. Then today – you lose Dante Jackson, and the next guy in is James Pierre. Comes in with a PFF grade of 59 out of 100, coverage grade of 57. Is that another original sin that's going to show up in this brutal, December football, January football, where you're going to have injuries and your depth is going to be exposed? Is that somewhat what we're seeing here?
Well, they better hope that they have all of their guys available. They're all of their receivers available, meaning George Pickens, and all of their corners available. Because again, even though I don't think Dante Jackson and Joey Porter Jr. have been great, they are worlds better than whatever we're going to go down to when we get past, the top two guys, and you start putting some of those other guys in. It's a little bit scary. So yeah. But that's what we talked about really in the offseason, isn't it? I mean, they didn't do enough to address corner. They didn't do enough to address receiver. And, if they're healthy, they might get away with it. But if they're not healthy, it's going to be a problem. And to me, last week everybody was going all excited because Deontay Johnson got cut or benched or whatever the hell happened with him and the Ravens or whatever. Deontay Johnson, yeah. Talking about how the Steelers just basically got a steal in that trade for Dante Jackson. And I said, yeah, they got the better of the two because, it feels like Dante Jackson is contributing more, but I'm not ready to say he's in his second coming of Rod Woodson. I mean, I don't know that he's been really all that good. He's been okay. I mean, he's been noticeable.
He's generated a lot of turnovers, Paul. And listen, there's something to be said for that, especially when you're paying a guy at safety to get $20 million to generate them, and he is not. There's something to be said for what Dante Jackson's done, but on a down-to-down basis, he's not a shutdown guy either, in my opinion.
Right, that's what I mean.
You're right, and I think you saw that today.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably a solid number 2 or 3 corner, right?
If he was the Steelers' third corner, I think you'd love it.
Right.
Yeah. Paul, I think on the one positive note today, you did contain Saquon Barkley. The entire week we talked about the record pace he's on. The otherworldly guy that he was at Penn State, he's turned back into with the Eagles. You end up holding him to 65 yards on 19 carries. Obviously, he missed some time, but still only averaged 3.4 yards on the carry. Kenneth Gainwell was he had 7 carries for 20 yards. That averages out to 2.9. So they did a decent job of keeping Barkley in check. What do you read into that, if anything?
Well, again, I mean, Barkley missed probably maybe a quarter and a half, almost 2 quarters, right? I mean, he was out for a lot of the game just because at the end of the day, he got hurt. They put him in the tent, and they didn't play him back before the first. You know what I mean? He missed a quarter and a half, maybe something like that. And the other part of it is, again, the Steelers contained him, yes, but it looked like the Eagles understood that that's probably going to be their game plan, was to line up and try and stop him. And quite frankly, at the end of the game, when they needed to contain him, they didn't. He got some first downs. He ran for some plays that, they had an opportunity to stop him and get him off the field. But at the end of the day, I thought the Steelers' defense was bad today. I thought methodically the Eagles did almost anything they wanted to do out there. They had a couple of they had the fumble that stopped the one drive. For the most part, they controlled the ball for 41 minutes or something, 40 minutes. They basically just did whatever they wanted to do. So, they basically said to the Steelers, okay, you're going to take away Barkley. We're just going to pass the ball. Not, short contained passes that are going to turn into long passes with runs after the catch and all that other stuff. Jalen Hurts is going to run the ball a little bit, and we're still going to get to where we need to get to.
Paul, not JJ, excuse me, TJ Watt goes down with the injury. It looked like they were working on his ankle. You and I are not plugged into the post-game comments, so we're not exactly sure. If you guys in the comments have seen anything, let us know.
Well, I was going to say, I just flipped over to Twitter real quick. He basically said he has an ankle sprain. X-rays are negative. He was asked, well, does that mean, are you going to play next week? And he said, we'll have to see how the week goes. So it sounds like it's an ankle sprain that is going to take at least a few days of practice or a few days of running around to see, how bad it is. The good news is, it sounds like he'll be back. Even if he doesn't play next week, he'll be back, pretty quickly.
Are they better positioned, Paul, with Nick Herbig and Alex Highsmith both looking solid to weather an injury than they have ever been? Or is it because he's just such a good player that there's no way that they can't feel his absence if he misses this game coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. Absolutely, I would say that. They're better equipped than they were. They can handle it, but you're still trying to replace TJ Watt. I mean, there's just some plays that guy makes that I don't care who you are, you're not making. So they're better equipped to do it. I think obviously they're going to still be able to get, pressure on the passer and all that other stuff. But you take TJ Watt. I mean, what's the Steelers? Don't the Steelers have some ridiculously bad record without TJ Watt in the lineup over the last, whatever? I mean, there's a reason for that. He's a superb, elite talent, and you just can't quite replace what he does, period.
Yeah, so certainly a situation to monitor in the week ahead. Paul, I mentioned earlier in the show that this was my first exposure to the Tom Brady booth. Listen, I'm not going to profess to be the perfect broadcaster. I think he does a pretty good job having come just right off the field into the booth. But I would also say he's not really been like Tony Romo was. Remember when Romo would be calling plays and reading the defenses early in his broadcasting tenure, and got a lot of praise for that. I heard Tom Brady used the word absolutely about 300 times. Even my fiance mentioned it, that, sitting on the couch that he kept saying the same thing kind of over and over. And I'll tell you what, Kevin Burkhardt does not do a lot for me as the lead guy in that booth either. I think of all the lead booths in the NFL, Fox is leaving the most to be desired for me.
And they're paying him like, what is it, $25 million or something a year, or whatever it is, $20 million a year they're paying Brady? Is that what they're paying him? Something like that?
Something crazy.
Something nuts like that. I agree with you. Here's the thing. The one thing that a guy like Brady does, I mean, hopefully he gets better at his delivery and he gets better at, not repeating the same things over and over and over and over again. The one thing I'll say about a guy like Brady is that he really, really understands football, especially offensive football, the intricacies and all that stuff. So there were times when he was able to sort of explain things that were happening out there, explain certain plays, explain certain mindsets of offensive coordinators. So I don't know that he was completely a loss. I don't know that it was terrible, but it's hard to listen to him ramble on and on and on at times. The other thing about it is, he falls into the trap of a lot of these national guys in that he's talking about the Steelers as if they're the Steelers of like 7 or 8 years ago, where they're, blue collar bruisers and all that other stuff. They just aren't that team anymore. But that's one of these things that these people love to throw out there about the Steelers.
Yeah, you got to always have the B-roll of the Edgar Thompson works thrown in there, just for the identity thing. Paul, let's wrap it up on this. Do you think the hopes of a number 1 or 2 seed died with today's results? Not just the loss, but the way the Bills looked against the Lions, dominating them. Obviously, there's still the wild card of this possible Patrick Mahomes ankle injury, but the Steelers are I believe now 3 games down with 3 to play. Obviously, you have 1 against the Chiefs, but they need a ton of help at this point to get the 1, and I even think to get the 2, being a game down on the Bills with the Chiefs and Ravens still left on your schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm looking at it right now. If you look at where they're at, they're 1 game behind the Bills, but they're really 1.5, I think. And the big thing is they're not going to get the number 1 seed. So if you don't get the number 1 seed, you don't get the bye. Whether you're the 2 or the 3, I don't know that it really significantly matters. The one thing that matters now is, would you rather play the Broncos or the Chargers? I mean, because those are the two teams that you're probably going to play. If you're the Steelers and you are the 2 or the 3, you're going to play either the Broncos or the Chargers. What gets interesting is if you lose next week to the Ravens and you somehow lose the AFC North, at that point, then the best you can do is the 5, and you're legitimately going to be looking at the possibility of having to go to either Baltimore or Houston in the first round, which that gets, you'd much rather have the Chargers or the Broncos coming to Acrisure Stadium than being the 5 seed. Now you got to maybe go to Houston or go. And I don't know that I really necessarily think Houston is that big of a deal, but on the road, you never know what could happen. And of course, you certainly, even though you've had a lot of success against Baltimore, you'd rather not have to play at Baltimore in your first round of your playoffs.
I think you have to have at least one home game, Paul, for this to be a viable Super Bowl contender, despite today's results. And I think in that way, I don't think you want to go to Buffalo either, Paul, in that what would be the second round game. So in that way, I think the difference between the 2 and 3 is substantial, because I think you got a lot better chance of beating Buffalo here than you do if you have to travel there. So I think that's what adds a lot of weight. But today was very damaging for that pursuit. Paul, what's your read on this game against Baltimore next week? Do you think, let's just say there's no Pickens, let's say there's no Watt. Do you have the stones to predict the Steelers win despite all that?
Without Pickens and Watt, no. I don't think they can win without both of them. If they have one of them, they have a really good chance of winning. But without both of them, that makes it really, really difficult.
Because Lamar Jackson was great today, Paul. We haven't mentioned that. He had 5 touchdown passes. I think he was like 3 points short of a perfect passer rating. They were able to rest Derrick Henry quite a bit, which I think is going to be big for them going into the stretch. If they got the Steelers Saturday, then they also play on Christmas Day against the Texans. I think Derrick Henry only had 14 touches today, so they managed his workload really well. They're playing pretty well. It's not as if they were like when they came in here last time. It was after they got torched by Joe Burrow. I believe they're now only averaging like 269 yards allowed per game in the last 4. So this is a team that seems to be finding something.
Well, I mean, really, if you look at the Ravens, and I never thought we would be saying this, but both of their last 2 losses, including the one to the Steelers, are because Justin Tucker is not very good right now. And if he finds himself and becomes, reliable again, I mean, if he makes field goals he's supposed to make, they beat the Steelers, and then who was it 2 weeks ago? They lost another game where, they lost by like 4 points, and he missed 2 field goals and an extra point or something like that, whoever that was that beat them. You look at what the Ravens have done. The one thing that you could count on was their kicker. And now, right now, but that tells me that they're good on offense and defense. So the other part I forgot to bring up when we were talking about the 1 or 2 seed. Buffalo's next 3 games, they have 2 against the Patriots and 1 against the Jets. So I'm assuming they're probably going to win out. And if they win out, the Steelers obviously can't catch them. So to me, it looks like they're locked into either the 3 seed or the 5 seed. And, you'd much rather be the 3 than the 5. That's why next week is so important.
Yeah, we will be here breaking that one down as well, Paul. So if you're just joining us for the first time, please subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please pop a like on it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. Paul, you'll also be back on Monday. You got your live streams every day now around 5 p.m. So if you enjoyed Paul today, we'll get a lot more tomorrow. We'll also have Jerry Dulac, Ray Fittipaldo with their post-game video from Lincoln Financial Field. So make sure you stay tuned to that. Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive on Monday. I believe he'll also have Ray. So plenty more coming your way. Thanks for joining us this evening, everyone. I look forward to another fun week of Steelers talk ahead. Have a good night.
I will see.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.